right, let's give this a shot. My name's Chris. Welcome to PodCamp Pittsburgh. We're gonna do a little thing called Once Upon a Time, and those three words kind of they evoke something in us. If you're an adult, you kind of pay attention when that happens, and if you're a kid, it may be the only time that you actually sit still and listen. But first, Joseph Campbell always says that we need a call to action to get things started. So this is our call to adventure here. We're going to get things started with The Muppet Show. Now that you're in a good storytelling mood, let me tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in a small town called Uniontown, down the road. I longed for the big city, bright lights, so I went to New York City, went to NYU. First time I was there was for college orientation. I'd never been in New York City. So my grandfather took me. He's an Archie Bunker type. It happened to be during Gay Pride Week. He wasn't too happy. So he dropped me off and he said, "You sure you want to go to school here?" And I got as big as I could, and I said, "Yeah." And I stayed. And I really liked New York. I got into video while I was up in New York City. I actually got into the internet after Al Gore invented it as well. And then I got homesick, so I moved back to Pittsburgh around 2000. From there, I managed a bunch of boring industrial products, hated it, so I said, wow, I like this new social media stuff. So I started to get into social media around 2006, 2007. And from there, I got back into video, and I started my own online game called 1129 Ridge, which was part video, part haunted house, all online.
We're at 1129 Ridge Avenue.
And we shot it. Very low budget, made it sepia tone on purpose, and made it look like an old sort of horror film. And you're allowed to play the game as well. Then the Pittsburgh Foundation called me up and said, "Hey, would you like to do this and help Pittsburgh as well?" And I said, "Well, sure." So I joined the Pittsburgh Foundation. I'm the manager of marketing and communications there, and I direct their social media activities. We launched this year Pittsburgh on Video, which is a new community video hub for Pittsburgh, by Pittsburgh, about Pittsburgh, all things Pittsburgh. I'm the first video curator of that site, and if you have videos, we welcome for you to actually put them on Pittsburgh on Video. And if you already have them on YouTube and Blit TV or Vimeo or any of the other video sharing sites out there, that's great. All you have to do is put the link in when you hit submit a video, and it'll pull it right in from there, and there's no other step. So it's real easy. Please send us your video. That's my plea for today. That's me in a nutshell. So let's talk about storytelling. Now, we used to be very good storytellers. So we used to sit around the fire, and this is the way we passed our history, our religion, and so we got very, very good at being storytellers. And then around the time we started to become less storytellers and more connoisseurs of storytellers. And that first started when we started printing and started sending that print out. When we started broadcasting it on the radio, when we put it into the big screen, and then we shrunk it into the small screen. So we actually became connoisseurs of storytellers, and we're not as good at telling stories now because of that. Now, our best storytellers, this happens to be a little movie called Star Wars, are very good storytellers. They use the same basic principles that we all did when we sat around the fire. George Lucas, who did Star Wars, uses from the playbook of Joseph Campbell. And we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell a little bit later. He's the sort of guru of myths and legends. And this is right out of his book. So the professionals still do the same things that we used to do back then when they tell stories. Then this comes along. And what this does, what social media does, what all these digital marketing tools do, is put that content back into your hands. So you can be the content providers again. So you have to be good at telling stories. Now what this has also done is it's basically killed newspapers. It's starting to have an effect on television, and it's even having an impact on radio and film. So there's a gap going on that you, as users of digital tools, need to provide. And I urge you to fill that gap, particularly when it comes to newspapers, because that gap, they're actually declining faster than you guys are growing on the digital side. And that gap, since newspapers are sort of the safeguards of democracy, needs to be filled by citizens now. So you guys have a task when you get out here. Now let's look at these tools a little bit closer. These are sort of the major video tools, and we're going to do a lot of video here, but we're going to talk about some of the other sites and how you can tell your stories through those as well. And let's just look at, I'm a geek, so I like stats. So let's look at some stats. Internet users viewed nearly 34 billion online videos in just May. May alone, 34 billion. Of course, YouTube's biggest. Google owns YouTube, so Google Video and YouTube Video, they're the biggest by far. They have the largest market share. Hulu's second with only about 3.5%. 183 million people viewed online videos last year. Average number of videos viewed per person, 186. Seems a lot to me, and I watch videos all the time, and I don't know if I watched 186 over the past year, but for YouTube, there's their statistics, very, very similar to overall. Average online video viewed is 4.3 minutes. Keep that in mind. If you can tell your story shorter, it's better. 3 to 5 minutes on a video is a good time frame. 85% of the U.S. internet audience viewed online videos in May. That's 85% of us that are online have watched a video in May. Now, we talked about the video sites, but these are all sort of the other social media platforms that are out there. And of course, blogging, it's a natural storytelling tool. It started out as a personal weblog, personal stories. Microblogging, that's Twitter. Can you tell a story on Twitter? Well, somebody's writing a novel 140 characters a time on Twitter, so I think you can. Use your URLs if you want to expand to more content. The social networking sites like Facebook, you can definitely tell your story there. You have video capability, photo capability, and you have the sharing status capabilities. Podcasts, natural tools, obviously, and there's a lot of sessions here on podcasting that you can learn how to start and maintain your podcast. So all of the digital platforms that are out there are good storytelling tools. What's cool about them is they all integrate very well as well. So if you've got your video up on YouTube, you can definitely embed it on your blog, on your website, on Facebook, and you can tweet about it on Twitter. Now all these tools down here also drive traffic to your video, so they all work together. We talked about George Lucas. This is the story of Stuff. This was a totally online video, and guess what? It uses the same playbook, Joseph Campbell's Hero in a Thousand Faces, when they decided to come up with this video. It took off virally, and now it's a book.
I got a little obsessed with all my stuff. Have you ever wondered where all the stuff we buy comes from and where it goes when we throw it out? I couldn't stop wondering about that, so I looked it up. And what the textbook said is that stuff moves through a system from extraction to production to distribution to consumption to disposal. All together, it's called the materials economy. Well, I looked into it a little bit more. In fact, I spent 10 years traveling the world, tracking where our stuff comes from and where it goes. And you know what I found out? That is not the whole story. There is a lot missing from this explanation.
Call to adventure right there. She spent 10 years traveling the world. She went on a journey right out of the storytelling playbook. And like I said, this was produced totally online. It was not produced for very much money as well. And it's had millions and millions of views since then. Now, what all these social media tools, all these digital tools have done for us is they've connected us around the world. I'm a journalism major degree from NYU, so I studied Marshall McLuhan. He came up with this thing called Global Village. Well, we're here. We're in that global village now. We're connected along the world. We share our interests no matter where we're at because of Facebook, Twitter, and all the other tools that are out there. But what I don't think he realized is that we also went local at the same time. We've gone hyper-local with telling stories. We want to know what's going on in our community, we want to be involved in our community, and we want to make sure other people know what's going on in our community. So at the same time we went global, we actually went really, really local. And that's where we kind of got the sort of disconnect with some of the traditional tools that are out there, like newspapers, because they couldn't do either very effectively. So let's see why we want to be good storytellers. Well, if you're an individual, it's a good way to connect you to other people that are of your interests, meet new people, those types of things. If you're looking for a job, if you tell your story better than the other candidate, then you're likely to get that job. If you're a business, well, you've got to sell products, so you want customers to understand what your product does, so you have to be able to tell a good story about your product. And if you're a nonprofit, well, hey, this is a piece of cake. You've got stories up the wazoo about how you impact the community, and so you need to get those stories out there, and so the better storyteller you are, the better you'll get those stories out there. Also, all these tools are very, very good for advocacy. So if you're a nonprofit and you look at advocacy, we've just barely scratched the surface of what we can do with things like YouTube and Facebook and these types of tools. Now, we're into the nitty-gritty, so we've got all the sort of history and stuff out of the way. So let's look at the how. And I invited a special guest to join us. I hope you don't mind, but he's all the way from WBEZ in Chicago. Mr. Ira Glass has agreed to join us, and he's going to give you about 5 minutes here on what
makes a good
story.
Important if you're making stories for television or radio is that you understand the building blocks of the stories. And there are different ways to think about this. One of the things you don't want to do is you don't want to think about it the way that you learned in high school, which is in high school we're all taught that the way that we write is that there's like a topic sentence and then there's like the facts which fill out the argument. In broadcasting it's completely different. In broadcasting I think you have two basic building blocks and they're very powerful and you can use them as you will. And one is the anecdote. And an anecdote is literally just a sequence of actions. You think of it as just like what is a story in its purest form? A story in its purest form is somebody saying, this happened, and that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, and that led to this next thing, like one thing following another. And some of the things in the sequence can be, and that made me think of this, and then I said this, like there could be thoughts and ideas as part of it, but like one is leading to the next, leading to the next. And the power of the anecdote is so great that no matter how, in a way, like no matter how boring the material is, if it's in a story form where there's an anecdote happening, and then he said this to me, and then I went food, and then I came downstairs, and I felt like, what the hell? Like, it has a momentum in and of itself that no matter how boring the facts are, like I'm trying to think of it, like okay, there's to try to think like the most boring possible story. Okay, there's a guy, and he wakes up and he's lying in bed, and the house is very, very quiet. It's just unearthly quiet. And so he sits up, and he puts his room forward and he walks through the door, and again, just very, very quiet. Walks downstairs, looks around, just unusually quiet. Now, like this is the most, like what I'm telling you is the most boring possible fact pattern, and yet there's suspense in it. It feels like something's going to happen, and the reason why is because literally it's a sequence of events. Like this guy's doing this thing, he's moving from space to space. You can feel through its form that when you have one thing leading to the next, leading to the next, you can feel inherently that you're on a train that has a destination, and that he's going to find something. And so one of the most powerful things you have to figure out is like, do you just start with the action, or should you just start with the action? And generally, you want to start with the action, or you often do. So that's one of your building blocks. The other thing that a anecdote has is that it's raising the question from the beginning, and that's the other thing you want is you want bait. You want to constantly be raising questions. So in Madeline's story, the bait is that the house is very quiet, and so the question hanging in the air is why. And it's implied that any question you raise, you're going to answer. And so again, that's another thing that we manipulate. We would be constantly raising questions and answering them. It's from the beginning of the story. And then the whole shape of the story is that you're throwing out questions to keep people watching and listening, and then answering along the way. Okay, so you have the building block, which is like the actual sequence of actions, the anecdote part of it. There's this thing happened, and then this thing, and then this thing. That's one building block. Then the other big building block, your other tool, is that you have a moment of reflection. And by that I mean, at some point, somebody's got to say, here's why the hell you're listening to this story. Here's the point of the story. Here's the bigger something that we're driving at. Here's why I'm wasting your time with all this. And one of the things that's very, very unfortunate for people who are launching into the kinds of jobs that all the people who are making video pods are launching into, one of the things that's so very sad, and it's like the bane of my existence, and it's the bane of anybody's existence who does this kind of work, is that often, you have the two parts of the structure. You've got the anecdote and you've got the moment of reflection. And often you'll have an anecdote which just kills. It's just so interesting. Like this thing happens and it leads to the next, and leads to the next, and it's so surprising, and so many things happen. You meet these great characters, and it means absolutely nothing. And it's just completely predictable. It doesn't tell you anything new. And so that's one huge problem. And then the other huge problem is you've got a kind of boring set of facts, or boring story, right? That actually, like, somebody actually has something kind of interesting to say about it. And so actually, I think a lot of us, when we're beginning, we get caught in the problem of, we know we've got something here. We know that there's something here that's kind of compelling, but it just doesn't seem to be coming together. And often, it's your job to be kind of ruthless and to understand that either you don't have a sequence of actions, you don't have the story part that works, or you don't have a moment of reflection that works. And you're going to need both. And in a good story, you're going to flip back and forth between the two. Like there'll be a little bit of action.
What's his name? Art Black. This American Life. on
And that's
NPR
like a
once
lot
a
of
week,
different
locally here on WIE.
you know, is to
And I can't remember the
have the
name.
perseverance that you've got an interesting anecdote that you also can end up with an interesting moment of reflection.
So the two key building blocks, according to Ira, are the anecdotes. We want to raise questions, we want to follow an action sequence, and then we want to have a resolution at the end. Thank you, Ira. So, what I want to do is give you a few little tips. Tell your story, don't talk. Most people don't like talking heads unless it's this guy.
And security guards are like...
So we want to try and avoid the talking heads, and how we can avoid the talking heads is let others tell our story for us. This is Homewood Children's Village. It's called 1 Square Mile. It was produced over a 2-month period in the Homewood neighborhood, and it details the story of Homewood, 9,162 residents, 1 square mile, 3,000 of those are kids, and it was told through the eyes of the kids. And I'll play you a little clip out of that.
What's it like growing up here?
Homewood is a bad place to live.
My cousins are known, you know how they get high, drunk and all of that. After they got high and drunk, they went to his house and they forced him to shoot himself. He shot himself and killed himself in his room.
There's a lot of violence that happens in Homewood. Shooting, murders, a lot of stuff now, and fights that could cause into death.
Sometimes Homewood feels dangerous to me because there's kids about 12 and older prostituting to people and try to get money to get drugs.
People ask me where I'm from, and I tell them I'm from Homewood, and they get the wrong news on me saying, well, they don't like Homewood, so they don't mess with me.
That Homewood is not the only violent community. We're not that violent, it's just that some people was raised like that.
So there you go. Your anecdote was set up for you by the kids telling you, and they tell a better story than I could standing up in front of you saying, you know, Homewood has some issues, and we need to deal with the Homewood issue. What you're missing out of this video is the resolution part of it. You'll have to watch it on Pittsburgh on video if you want to see that. How about we want to keep them listening? So here's a few tips for you. You want to evoke curiosity. And now you're curious about Homewood because you heard the kids talk about it. And maybe it's not something that's always at the top of your mind. It's typically a neighborhood we don't think about here in Pittsburgh. But now you're curious and you heard the kids talk about it. Don't end at endings necessarily. You want to leave a little bit of a cliffhanger. You want to call to action sometimes, depending on what story that you're telling them. So you can actually end in the middle and restart it back up, and you've got a person that really wants to continue turning the page if it were a book, or moving on to the next story if it's on a digital platform. Remember to remind, particularly if you're going a little bit of a long story, you want to remind people what we're talking about and why we're talking about that. Don't forget the villain, and the villain doesn't have to be a person. The villain in this case is the issue in Homewood. You know, there's a number of villains, so don't forget them. Give them equal play. It makes for a better story. Honor the inevitable. Don't be predictable, but again, your resolution really should come out in your anecdote. Keep your promises. If you make a promise that you're going to tell them something, make sure you tell them. Respect your audience. Make sure you know who your audience is. And if you're just throwing it up onto YouTube, you've got a large audience, but there are different subgenres within that audience. And unless you're dancing down and out, you're probably not going to hit the majority of the YouTube audience anyways. So respect your audience. Know who that audience is, who you want to see this film. Make sure you tell the story from that standpoint. Whoops, too fast on the clicker. And not every audience is the same, so you can adapt your story to meet different audiences. You don't need to spend a lot when we're talking about video to get a lot. This is a flip cam. You'll see a lot of them floating around today, I'm sure. The flip cam is under $200. It's a really good camera for $200. Don't be so hung up on making a slick film or television commercial when you're telling your story. people will get around shaky camera and other sort of put pans that shouldn't be there and things like that if the story is good. I was trying to pull in an example today from WNYC. I wasn't able to do so, but they gave a camera to an architect. He took it on the subway in New York, and the camera was doing this as the subway was going down the tracks, and so it was a little difficult to watch. But you know what? You tuned that out, and you really heard his story when he was telling about this building and that building on his subway ride in from Queens, and it made for a good story despite the choppy camera action. So don't worry about your sort of video technical skills so much, but because if you tell a good story, people will forgive you for those. This is a Joseph Campbell tip. Follow your bliss. And the best example I could possibly give you of following your bliss is Winnie the Pooh. When Winnie the Pooh is hungry, he seeks out food. When he needs comfort, he seeks out his friends. He follows his bliss throughout every Winnie the Pooh story, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with those stories. Follow your bliss in a Joseph Campbell term means follow your talent. So if when you're telling your story, make sure you know your story and use your talents to tell your story. A couple more tips from Joseph Campbell. Perfection does not exist. So don't try and attain it. And in fact, imperfection makes you actually feel life. And I think you got that from the Homewood video as well. Life lives on through stories. So please tell your stories because you're actually communicating your history. Big finish. So this is what I want to leave you with. This is our resolution. And I go back to the Muppets as we started with them. And you. All right, now it's your participation time. So anything video related, storytelling related, or anything else that's on your mind, or share a story. You can even start with Once Upon a Time if you like. Fire away.
Can you get,
Okay.
Can you get a little more specific with video cameras that you would recommend for just a video podcast?
I would seriously recommend the flip cam to anybody. The HD version is pretty nice. There are a few others that I know some of the other video podcasters would probably recommend to you as well that they use. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly what programs they're using. All are fairly inexpensive as well, and they're pretty. Go ahead.
I wanted to offer a suggestion. And I'm thinking about what camera to get. Focus on the lighting in the room that you're shooting in. Don't shoot with someone who's right in front of a window, that kind of thing.
Good point.
Even with a cheap camera, you can do good stuff if it's well lit, and maybe invest in a microphone for $80.
Yeah, that's the one sort of drawback on the flip cam is the mic is on board, and sometimes it doesn't give you exactly the best sound. So that's a very good tip. Thanks. Sir.
Oh, I just want to know, what was the name of the movie of Stuff?
The Story of Stuff, and it's at thestoryofstuff.com. You can also find it on YouTube, I believe, as well. It's been around for about 2-3 years now. Like I said, she just wrote a book. There's been spin-offs. There's like the story of water bottles now and the story of other stuff. It's actually being used in the classroom as a digital teaching tool to teach kids about environmental issues.
The story of water bottles is excellent.
Chris, how are you finding your stories for the Pittsburgh Foundation besides to listen?
Boy, it's easy for me. I hate to say that, but it really is easy for me because we work with all the nonprofits in the area. So typically the stories that we are telling is the stories of our grantees because that's how we feel like we're making an impact is by helping them make an impact. So we gave flip cams out to a number of our grantees. That program is still, sort of ramping up. And we actually told them, go ahead and tell your story, and then we're sharing this back on our site. So really, that's sort of, it's a little bit easier for me to find stories, especially when you're funding things like the Homewood Children's Village. We have one that I want to work on in the near future. It's Jail Collaborative Initiative. It's introducing former offenders back into society, and I think those will make good stories as well. So, but really, I guarantee you, if I went around the room and asked you to give me a story, you'd probably have 2 or 3 that you'd probably give me.
So how do you gauge feedback? Like how do you gauge responses you get to the stories you put online, or?
On your videos, boy, it's kind of like if people aren't watching, it's really a video. you know, you can look at your views and how many people are actually viewing it. If you want, you know, realistic feedback, most of the video sharing sites, including Pittsburgh on Video, have a commenting tool, and so you can hear from other people. What I look for is how many people actually tell other people to watch the video. Homewood Children's Village is probably my best success on Pittsburgh on Video because it launched in July and it had that initial hit, and now it's actually back up and it's the second most popular video on Pittsburgh on Video because somebody else found it and spread it to a bunch of people. And that's the power of a good story, is that it will take off virally. And you have the tools in front of you when you're learning about Twitter and Facebook out there. Those are, you know, great viral starters for you. So.
Or if someone will just talk to you and tell you, oh, I saw that, I liked it, I didn't comment.
Exactly. You have to, you know, people email these things, you have to see this on YouTube. Those are typically the funnier videos. And you know, humor is a great tool. So if you have the ability to use humor to tell your story, use humor.
I mostly use Facebook. You know, like I'll post stuff, let's say about Jon Stewart's little march.
There you go. Yeah, so you know, you're participating in that viral campaign for him. So.
Yeah.
See you in a second.
So for the videos that you're shooting there, do you worry about the time length of them? I mean, that's always a question, how long you shoot it?
Depends. You know, we try and say 3 to 5 minutes. That is not always possible. Homewood is actually 15 minutes, so we call it a short documentary.
Do you do like a short version of them then to make it promo, or is that?
You can. That's a very good. You can treat it as if it were a film, and you can create teasers and campaigns or split it into parts. YouTube will let you post anything up to about 15 minutes now. It used to be 10. It's now up to about 15. So that should give you plenty of time. The most important thing is make sure that you have an engaging story that will last over that amount of time. Else those people will get bored and turn it off and switch to the next thing. So.
You just raised a question in my head, and that is breaking it into parts. Do you think it's more a better way to do it, to kind of leave a question at the end to lure someone into a second part, broken into segments rather than one long?
If you can, we break. You know, we film, you know, press conferences all the time. We break them into parts, and to tell you the truth, it does nothing to get people to watch part 2 and part 3 typically. But if you have a story that you can end at a good point, a good cliffhanger point, to use a television term, to get people to watch the next video, then please, you know, give that a shot.
And a follow-up to that as well, I think I noticed a contrast in styles in what Ira was talking about, and that is the journalistic style, kind of front-loading and then going into detail versus a narrative.
Mm-hmm. That's the difference between telling and talking. When you're a storyteller, you let sort of things unfold as they go. Whereas in a journalistic type story, the way I was trained to write for print is you make sure that, you know, the key information is up on the first 2-3 paragraphs at most, and then you fill out the story from there.
Is it fair to say that people are looking for a narrative more than a journalistic style if you're trying to attract readers?
Typically, yeah. And you can turn your journalistic style into a narrative style without too much effort because you already have the facts. It's just the way that you tell them. So.
Thanks.
Back to the flip phone.
Yeah.
I understand with the base model, you simply shoot the video and the voice, plug it into the computer, it goes right to YouTube. Basically one button, you know, touch button. Mm-hmm. With the HD, I heard that there's a couple extra steps you have to do. Is that true? On the upload part.
On the upload part, yeah, it's not much. It's maybe another step. It's not complicated. And again, all the software is on the camera, so as soon as you plug the camera into the computer, it'll load the software. And I'll give you some basic editing tools as well. I won't give you a lot of editing tools, but I'll give you some basic editing tools.
Chris, for those of us trained more in still photography than video.
Those make good videos.
Well, I was going to say, are there tools that you would recommend to link photos together to create a video?
There's an online tool, starts with an M, that will do it for you, and unfortunately I've forgotten it.
What about Animoto? Does that do it?
That one will do it too.
Animoto.
Yep. Thank you.
What is it?
Animoto. A-N-I-M-O-T-O. Yeah.
And any of the decent $100, $200 movie softwares would do that.
Yeah, in fact, if you have an Apple
iMovie's
great.
Right.
So it comes with it. I mean, it's great. If you're on a PC, then there's a Premiere Lite. It's not bad. That's $100.
And then are there sites that you can just use to just, like Twitter, you obviously send characters. Are there sites that you can use to just send videos?
Well, Twitter's kind of getting more into sending photos or videos, but it's not going to come into posts. It's more of a link. So you can definitely send the link through Twitter.
Twitter's adding video.
I wanted to get to that, but no, I was hoping you'd jump in there because you probably know more about it. Yeah, they're supposedly adding video capabilities, but we'll see. Twitter's a love-hate relationship, really, anyways, because they need to sort of fix what they don't have working right, yet they're adding new features at the same time. So we'll see. But yeah, they're supposed to add video capabilities here shortly. So,
but if you put it on YouTube, like you were saying, it's owned by Google. It's kind of like now you're on the internet.
Yeah, actually, YouTube. It's dangerous to give me a clicker. YouTube it's owned by Google. It's actually the second largest search engine unto itself anyways. So if you're loading something onto YouTube, you can embed it back to any other site that you want, like your blog or your website. It's fairly easy to do because it gives you the embed codes. Particularly if you've got a WordPress blog, you just drop the embed code in and it will actually just bring the video in.
And that's how you post it. You do your flip cam and take it, download it onto YouTube, and then from there you put it on.
Yeah, I highly recommend you
Facebook.
don't necessarily have to put it onto like a YouTube or a Vimeo or anything like that. But I highly recommend it because then let them deal with the bandwidth of the video. Videos are large. They're inherently large files. The things coming out of the flip cam are close to 100 megs usually, depending on how much time you've got on that video. So, get that bandwidth out. You don't necessarily have to. You could upload that video directly to a website or a blog, but there's no reason to. So, and you get the other advantages of search engine optimization, those types of things. And
also the transcriptions and so forth that YouTube offers for video. You can put in you can put in text so that someone who can't hear can get some of the effects of what you've got.
Yeah. You get some other advantage. Yeah, exactly. That's a good point too. You get other advantages that sites do. And if you're uncomfortable on YouTube, I personally, if I want to just host a video somewhere and embed it back, and I'm not worried about connecting it to a larger community like YouTube has, I use Vimeo because Vimeo is a more professional site. It doesn't have the advertising that YouTube puts in. It's actually a high quality video. When you load it, it has better compression features to it. So I recommend Vimeo if you're just bringing it back somewhere else and you don't want, you're not looking for those other advantages that you get off of YouTube, like search engine optimization and things. Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason why I would not want to put my video on all of those video with?
No reason if you want to take the time. And actually, Andy gave me a great. I sat in on Andy's presentation at 10 o'clock, and I didn't even know about this one, but he mentioned TubeMogul, TubeMogul, which now I'm like, oh boy, I've been doing it wrong for a while. So TubeMogul will actually take that and put it for you in a lot of sites. So,
what is it?
What's it called?
TubeMogul, TubeMogul. I'm sorry, I don't have the experience with it to tell you exactly what it was, but if Andy recommends it, I'm sure it's good. So.
I haven't used it yet, but that's basically just it takes time to set up. You have to set up profiles for every account, but once you do that, you just hit a button and
that'll make it a lot easier on you to pull it. There's no reason not to. I mean, obviously, if you're looking for traffic, YouTube by far has the largest market share. But you never know who might hit it somewhere else. I really got to quit my clicker.
Question about audio, not full-blown podcast, but put up different audio segments. I use Blogger and haven't really found a satisfying tool for putting audio up. What I wound up using is the video feature in Blogger, which basically is, with a sort of envelope around it, is basically YouTube creating a video file that's basically my audio with some text in, but it really is a cheat. Do you have any recommendations for anything YouTube-like for audio so that you don't have to create like an audio track of text just
on that specific platform?
No, and it's something that ideally you could plug into any more than one platform, including that one.
Well, in most cases, audio is treated like video, there are some plugins in WordPress that will allow you to do it. I don't know if you have some
There's
recommendations.
Libsyn. I think a lot of podcasters use Libsyn, and I think they're also a sponsor of the podcast. So.
Okay, then that's the one to go with.
Spell it or say it again, I'm sorry.
L-I-B as in boy, S-Y-N as in Nancy.
Thank you.
Or Liberated Syndication.
Where are we at? 5 minutes if you've got anything.
Did you think video is still underutilized?
Yes, by far. Even those numbers stagger me. And you know, I'm an analytics kind of person. Those numbers stagger me. That so many videos are watching. But yeah, I do believe it's underutilized, particularly you know, in my sort of area of concentration on profit. It tells good stories. It's very personal.
I have kind of a strange question. Among other things, I'm a professional storyteller. As in, I get in front of a group of people and but I do it sitting around the campfire way.
Sure.
And there is a fairly large community in Pittsburgh of storytellers.
Yes, there are.
How do I get that community tapped into what you're doing? Or how do I get you connected to that?
Funny you should mention that. If I could plug, the Pittsburgh Foundation is looking to launch here in the next month or two a storytelling initiative that will tie Pittsburgh on Video in with on-stage storytelling for groups, and also a couple photo projects and some other things. And we will be filming stories, so definitely take my card or give me your contact information. We'll talk about it. It's Urban Fables, I think, will be the title. It's not.
I got a couple of
not set, but we're working with. I don't know if you worked at all with For Real. That group, part of that group is helping us get our initiative off the ground. So it would be like a moth, but some other features to it. So thank you for allowing me to plug getting that in.
When marketing people like from the nonprofits that you work with, we're used to doing like press releases and more of a journal style. I imagine for some people it's harder than for other people to turn it into a story. So do you have like ways that you help people change their thinking, or?
You know, other than sort of the examples I would use is you know, definitely kind of think of this as a story. You guys were read stories when you were kids. If you have kids, you're reading them stories. So you have this ability. I mean, it's part of your genetic makeup. You've just forgotten it over time because then we became connoisseurs of it. Thank you. But as far as taking a press release is concerned, you know, definitely think in the way that Ira Glass proposed it, so that you're not, you know, starting with the facts, but setting those facts up along that story and then coming to the resolution at the end, which is totally different, like you said, from a press release, where really the resolution is typically in the first paragraph. So take that first paragraph, put it at the end, take all the facts and build to it, you've probably done it. So. What do we got? Guys want to get out here? I'll leave you with one mission.
May the force be with you.